Welcome to In Solidarity, a Seva Cooperative Federation podcast. Seva Cooperative Federation has been working for over 30 years to economically empower women in the informal sector through worker-owned cooperatives and collective enterprises. To put it quite simply, we work as a women's enterprise support system to promote and strengthen grassroots women's enterprises. Through this series of podcasts, we hope to cover themes that are of importance to informal women workers and their cooperatives and collective enterprises, and how we can create an enabling environment for women's enterprises to thrive.
अभी तो बहुत बड़ा सपना है हमारा।
मुझे कामनी बहुत जरूरत है, मैं मना ले जाओ।
अब हम लोग के पास कैपिटल आ गया, अब हम लोग खुल के करेंगे बिजनेस।
સમયમાં તો જોવા જઈએ તો આપણે બધો કામમાં જ સમય જાય છે, પોતાના માટે સમય કાઢવો બહુ મુશ્કેલ હોય છે।
अभी हम लोग मतलब ये पैसा राउंड होते होते हम लोग 12-13 लाख का बिजनेस चल रहा है।
You've tuned in to In Solidarity, a Seva Cooperative Federation podcast. According to a 2018 ILO study, 2 billion of the global employed population earn their living in the informal economy. The informal economy exists in countries at all levels of socioeconomic development and encompasses a wide range of jobs and economic activities with no formal contracts, no work and income security, and no social security. Street vending, home-based work in global and domestic value chains, waste picking and domestic work, short-term contract work, daily wage labor are all examples of informal work. Despite witnessing rapid economic growth over the last 2 decades, nearly 90% of workers in India have remained informally employed, producing about half of the gross domestic product, GDP. According to a February 2021 report by the Initiative for What Works to Advance Women and Girls in the Economy and the Institute of Social Studies Trust, while women make for only 23% of those employed in India's informal sector, 91% of Indian women in paid jobs are in the informal sector. Women in the informal economy are particularly vulnerable to abuse and exploitation due to low and unstable incomes, lack of social protection, and no written contracts. They do not have the bargaining power to seek better terms or working conditions. Besides, gender biases and social and cultural norms dictate women's time and mobility. My name is Priyanka, and joining us today on episode 4, Exploring Informality and Women's Work, is Martha Chen. Martha Chen co-founded the WIEGO network, which works to raise the voice and visibility of the working poor, including domestic workers, home-based producers, street vendors, and waste pickers around the world. She is a lecturer in public policy at the Harvard Kennedy School. Her specialization includes employment, gender, and poverty. In April 2011, she received the Padma Shree, a high civilian award by the Government of India. I'm so delighted that I get to have this conversation with her, exploring her time in India, her work, the vast world of informality and women's work, and if women's collectives are the best way to formalize the informal. Welcome to the show, Marty Ben. I'm going to start off by asking you about Elaben Bhatt, the visionary and founder behind the Seva movement. Tell us the story of when you met her first.
I met Elaben in Dhaka, Bangladesh in 1976. I was working with the local organization BRAC, and she was on a UNICEF consultancy to help advise on how to empower women. And we met, and I think there was a bond from the beginning. And she taught me my first lesson in sort of political economy of the informal economy. And her example was that if you're a woman in rural Gujarat and you're weaving baskets from bamboo, you have to pay 15 rupees per bamboo, and then you have to figure out how to transport it to your home. But the paper mills buy bamboo from the forestry department of the government for 15 paisa.
Wow.
And she had many such nuggets of wisdom through the years that she would share.
That's lovely to hear. A quick note to all our listeners. We lost our beloved founder, Ilaben Bhatt, in November last year. Her work lives on through the various institutions she has built, through the grassroots women leaders she nurtured, the movement she breathed life to, and the work of several people, including Marty Ben, whom she inspired. And we hope to hear more about that through this episode. That brings me to the next question. Marty Ben, in India, 91% of women who are employed are in the informal economy. From your years of work, tell us a little bit about informality and how perhaps women experience informality differently from men.
My whole career has been dedicated to helping empower women in the informal economy. And for 2 decades, I worked in South Asia and I worked with them. But then I went to Harvard University. And when I got there, the economists were very dubious about the informal economy. And I realized that there were some dominant negative narratives about the informal economy. And I've sought to change those. That's what WIEGO, the network I founded, and working with SEWA, we've been trying to do. And one of the ways to do that is to get better data. So we now know, because we've been working with the International Labour Organization to improve statistics, that over 60% of all workers globally are informally employed. So that's a majority. And if you are in developing countries or low middle income countries like India, it is 90% or more.
Right.
So the idea that it's somehow abnormal, that it's a problem that should go away, that they don't comply with taxes and regulations, they're non-productive, all the negative narratives are really quite false, because most of them are poor people. They don't earn enough to be liable for taxes. And they are trying to earn an honest living in a very hostile legal and policy environment. And so that's what we are dedicated to changing. We used to think that more women than men were informally employed, but actually it's roughly equal in terms of percentage globally. And there's some countries where a higher percentage of women workers. But what we do know is that the informal economy is very diverse. And women tend to be concentrated in the lowest earning segments. So you can think about that by occupation, the kinds of occupations, domestic work in other people's homes, production from your own home. Heavily women, home-based workers are majority women. But you can also think about it in terms of status in employment. So if you're an owner of a small enterprise, or if you're an employee that's informally employed, you're more likely to be a man than a woman. But if you're a piece rate worker or an unpaid contributing family worker, you're more likely to be a woman. So women are concentrated in the lower echelons of the informal economy. And they do have this sort of additional burden of the domestic chores and the care work that most societies ascribe to women, but particularly in South Asia.
Martha, you've largely lived in the subcontinent between Bangladesh and India, and you've worked with both women in the informal economy as well as their cooperatives and collectives. Can you share with us some of your experiences of working with women's collective enterprises?
Well, in the 1970s, my work was primarily or maybe exclusively in Bangladesh. And it was sort of the beginning of the women in development sort of movement. And SEWA was starting up in India, and BRAC was starting up in Bangladesh. And I had the privilege of heading the women's program. And there were two pillars of how we worked. One was that we were organizing the village women into village organizations or savings and credit groups or sector-specific collectives. And we were building the support structures through a sector lens. So what people who raised chickens needed was different than women who were spinning silk, was different from women who were embroidering quilts. And so we had a sector-specific approach and the organizing approach. And then in the 80s, I was living in India, working in India for Oxfam America, and I worked with probably 60 different women's organizations or NGOs that supported women. And there were different kinds of cooperatives. One of the big cooperative movements in India way back was Lijjat Papad. Do you remember Lijjat Papad? And it was women in their homes making papad, and there was this whole organization of those women. There was the dairy cooperatives in India, and what we found was that women did a bulk of the work in dairying, but they were not members historically in the dairy co-ops. So we worked together. There were Sewa, there was a remarkable woman at Ford Foundation, B.G. Srinivasan, and I. We sort of worked to get women integrated into the dairy cooperatives, to be trained as paravets. And there was an organization in Bombay at the time, of the women who catered to the textile workers. They made all the chapatis and dal, and the men would come and pick up their tiffins. And there was this organization, Annapurna Mahila Mandal, and the Working Women's Forum in Madras. Under Working Women's Forum, there was a cooperative of lace makers in Narsapur, Andhra. So there was the beginning of a cooperative movement as far back as the 70s for women. And of course, it's grown. And Sewa's work began, the first cooperative big was the bank. The Sewa Bank, which was formed, I think, in 1974, has been a cooperative bank from the beginning. The women are the shareholders. They get the annual bonuses. And when I first visited Sewa in 1979, they had recently formed a cooperative of chindi workers. And these are women who make patchwork quilts from leftover textile waste called chindi. And I learned from Sewa that they were a trade union for all of the struggle that needed to happen, the bargaining and the campaigning and the protesting, but they also needed cooperatives to provide the development services for the women to improve their livelihoods. So that joint action of trade unions and cooperatives was there from the beginning of Sewa.
A quick note to all our listeners. Annapurna Mahila Mandal originated in Mumbai as a registered society and trust of urban self-employed wives of textile mill workers. These women cooked tiffins from their homes for Mumbai's working professionals, and these tiffins got delivered by the dabbawalas. The primary function of the organization was to raise bank loans on a group guarantee basis for these individual women who run mini lunch homes in their own houses. Marty-ben, you said you met Ila-ben in 1976, and you call it love at first sight. What were some of your biggest learnings from the Seva movement?
Well, as I mentioned, I started working with working poor women in village organizations in Bangladesh. So that became my passion, my commitment, my enduring focus of my work. And I've had a long career because of my age. It's many decades. But what I learned from Sewa was that Sewa is unique in its commitment to building institutions from below, right? The bank was built from below. It wasn't just a bank and then you had some women clients. It was a bank owned and managed by the women. And so Sewa has that unique commitment to building institutions from below. And the women are leaders. They're the shareholders. They sit on the board. They're the trustees of the institutions. And that's, I think, truly rare in the organizations. In other organizations where they might have women, it could be more token, but not in Sewa. you can feel the pulse in Sewa as you enter, that it's all about the women.
I completely agree. Matiben, that brings me to WIEGO. How was WIEGO born, and what is the role of, statistics, research, and policy in empowering informal women workers and their collectives? And if I were to talk about India in particular, there is a lack of credible data around informal women workers and their cooperatives. There has been a lack of credible data for over decades, right?
Well, as I mentioned, when I came to Harvard in 1987, I found that this phenomenon of the working poor that I've been working with was poorly understood, and if negatively understood, if you will. And so I sort of circled around how to stay involved overseas and how to work on the informal economy. And I collaborated with Renana Jabvala of Sewa and a woman at then UNIFEM, now UN Women. Her name was Marilyn Carr. We did a project documenting collectives of women in South Asia. The volume was called Speaking Out, because that was what really the purpose was, that these women should be able to speak out. But one of the precipitating events to forming WIEGO was that Sewa was very involved with organizations of home-based workers and the International Labor Organization in pushing for the first ILO convention on any category of informal workers, which was home-based workers. And the convention has to be discussed. Any convention has to be discussed twice by the International Labor Organization. So I went for the preliminary discussion and vote in 1995 to Geneva, and I met with Ilaben and Renana and the others. And when I met with Ilaben over breakfast at a little cafe, she called the little square Harvard Square because I was at Harvard and she wanted Harvard statistics. I said, what can I do to help? And she said, we need statistics on home-based workers because the preliminary vote was sort of predictable. The employers voted against, the workers voted for, and it depended then on how many countries voted for. And enough had voted for in the preliminary vote, but they needed to assure they would vote in the final vote the next year. So Ilaben said, we need statistics and we need the Harvard stamp of approval. So I said, sure. But I started working with a colleague who had also done work with Sewa, Jennifer Substead, and we found that only 7 countries in the world had statistics on home workers. And so we needed to go to ad hoc surveys to really build up a picture. But we did, and they printed many copies of it to distribute. And Ilaben and Renana Ben sent me a postcard from Geneva, which read, the employers had their ideology, the workers had their statistics, and the convention was passed.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so that joint action of organizations of workers, researchers and statisticians, and UNIFEM was more sort of practitioners, we felt that joint action was important. And so we brought together 7 other experts on the informal economy to a team retreat at the Rockefeller Bellagio Center. And we planned WIEGO. We called it a project at the time, but Ilaben said, no, it was never a project. It was always a movement. But we didn't really know that it would grow into a movement. But it did. And we are committed to 3 things. One is voice. So collective organization, representation, being able to bargain and advocate effectively. The second is the visibility, and the second V. And that's visibility in the official statistics. We don't generate our statistics. We're trying to get national statistics improved. And in policy research, visibility. And the third, if you have voice and visibility, then hopefully the workers will be seen as legitimate, as valid. That's validity is the third B, rather than negatively. We want them to be seen as economic actors, that the broad base of the economy is informal and it's contributing. So that's the whole theory of change, if you will, of WIEGO. And we are happy that we've been able to help support and build 4 international federations of informal workers. And these are domestic workers, home-based workers, street vendors, and waste pickers. And those networks have affiliates in 90 countries. And there's SEWA's a member, so that has strength. But there are another 3 million workers around the world, so we're a total of 5 million in the movement.
All right, that brings me to the next question. Just as we met and before we started recording the podcast, you said that you don't consider yourself a researcher. Why do you say that?
Well, first of all, my first half of my career was as an activist, and so that is who I am. The other is that a lot of researchers in academia trade in the world of ideas, if you will, and always start with theory, right? And I've always learned by being on the ground. And so I build theory inductively. I don't take received wisdom and then test it. I try to build theory, humble theory, if you will, but it's grounded theory. And so I find myself, my heart is really with being with the women, learning from the ground up. And that's who I am.
I'm going to talk a little bit about the future. What, according to you, Martha, is the role of women's cooperatives or collectives in empowering informal women workers? And other than cooperatives and collectives, what are some of the other ways of bringing informal women workers into the formal economy?
Well, first and foremost, the informal workforce is the majority of workforce. So the future of labor organizing, of social protection, of any of the sort of broader development goals has to include the informal workers, not just as poor or vulnerable people, but as economic agents who contribute. So that's very important. They have to have collective voice. So I believe in collectives of different kinds working, and a single collective can do multiple things. So they need the voice. They need its power we're talking about. You know, the employers have their employers association, right? The workers need their associations, right? And for some reason in our capitalist world, the employers associations are seen as legitimate and labor organizations are seen as illegitimate. We've got to change that. But they need their organizations, the workers. And the trade unions, formal, have not always been able to organize informal workers. They don't know what to do. And part of the problem is that 44% of all workers globally are self-employed. They're not wage employed. So there's not an employer with which you bargain. If you go to the informal workers, we're talking 2/3 or 3/4 are self-employed, right? So their form of organizing is being a cooperative is a good form because they need to make their businesses more viable, right? And sometimes it's joint production and sometimes it's individual production, but joint marketing. The cooperatives can take different forms. You can have credit cooperatives, many different forms, but they need collective voice, they need collective power. And sometimes the only ways to be able to market independently is to be a collective. So all the home-based workers in the world, if they're connected to global supply chains, they're connected as piece rate workers, subcontracted workers. It's only when they form their own producer group that they can try to market and be integrated in a different way, right? So it's very, very important. And it's through the organizations and also their visibility in the statistics that we've really been able to say, it's the broad base of the economy. The tip is the formal corporate sector, right? I fight all the time. The private sector creates 90% of the jobs of the world. You hear this all the time. I say, no, it's not true. The corporate sector, the private sector is the corporate sector in most minds, right? It doesn't create 90% of the 90% of jobs is created by people. It's the people sector. And so that's the future. And we need to understand that people are self-employed, that most enterprises are very small. They're not big corporate enterprises. And so it is the future. Informality is only growing because it's a way for corporations to avoid responsibilities. So you have platforms, you subcontract. All those forms of employment are ways for them to avoid their responsibilities to labor. And so labor has to organize. That's the future. And it has to be informal workers. So fortunately, we do have a movement inspired by Sewa, informed by Sewa. I call Sewa the mothership of the movement.
You talk about the importance of collective voice. Do you have some anecdotes of the impact of collective voice? What kind of policy changes do you think we need to enable this kind of collectivizing?
Well, by definition, they don't have social protection, informal workers. So that's one area of policy that all of them need is the social protection. And they need not just themselves, but their organizations recognized and to have a seat at the table, if you will, of policy making and rule setting. And then the policies often have to be sector specific, right? So if you take cities, then what, let's say, home-based workers need is that the city provides some kind of de facto tenure and basic infrastructure services to their home as workplace. And don't relocate them to 25 miles outside the city or even 5 miles outside, because then their whole livelihood becomes unviable.
Yeah.
The street vendors, they need access to public space, right? I've just documented the struggle for Badra Chowk Market. It's been a long struggle, and it's a struggle over whether it should be a heritage plaza for tourists or whether it should be a heritage market for the vendors, right? And it's a constant ongoing negotiation. And right now they're relocated, but who knows? And they have to. And what Sewa did was they had their members in Badra Chowk, but they formed a market committee of Badra Chowk, which included non-Sewa members. It included men, because they needed to have that whole market as a collective that could bargain collectively, right? Otherwise, the municipality, the police, the BIs that allocate space, they could just deal individually with them. So they formed a market. It became it's not a cooperative as such, but it's a local organization that is demanding rights. Yeah. And then the waste pickers, they want to be integrated into solid waste management, right? I remember when sitting with the waste pickers of Sewa years ago, and they were telling me that something had come into the city that was for managing waste, and they didn't know what to call it, but they drew a picture, and it was a garbage truck. And there hadn't been garbage trucks, but the garbage trucks and the company was a company in Surat, not Ahmedabad, known to a councilman from the Ahmedabad Municipal Corporation that got a contract to do the waste collection. And meanwhile, you had a collective of waste pickers who were not considered, right? So they are organizing around the world. We have a very important example in Colombia, Bogota and other cities, of waste pickers getting contracts from the municipal government to do the waste collection. And Pune, India, they have one as well. And that's what they want. So it becomes very sector specific, what the specific policies to integrate them, right? But they need to be part of a new social contract. You know, if the social contracts that we had have broken down around the world. Many places there's no welfare state anymore, or it's being dismantled. And the new social contracts have to involve the informal, right? And so there's the common policies, and then there are the sector policies. And the similar to urban, you can think of rural and land being given over for industrial purposes. Same kind of struggles for livelihoods, but it becomes very sector specific. Well, if I may give the example of the waste pickers of Colombia, there is an association in Bogota of recicladores, they're called, and a national association. And it's a graphic story, but the National Association was formed when in, I think it was the city of Cartagena, 10 or so waste pickers disappeared. And what they found was they had been killed, and their bodies were used in the medical hospitals for the autopsy labs. They were that dispensable. Can you imagine? And the National Association formed around that. Meanwhile, in Bogota, there was a husband and wife, Nora and Silvio, she was third generation waste picker. He was first generation. And they had been working at a landfill, and they collected they began to organize. And they were able to put aside in one area all the glass that they reclaimed from the landfill. And when they had enough glass, they hired a truck, put all the glass on the truck, put a mattress on top of the glass, sat on the mattress, and got the driver to drive them to Medellin in Colombia, where the glass factories are. And it was the first time they'd broken the market. They knew the strength of organizing. And meanwhile, they were working with the Constitutional Court of Colombia, sympathetic judges, and they were able to secure several constitutional court rulings. It's like the Supreme Court of India. One was, that they are environmental agents and are contributing. And in 2011, there was a ruling that they should be able to compete as associations to bid for solid waste management contracts. Now, Nora, who's smart and tough as nails, Nora Padillo, she is alleged to have written 5,000 pages of legal briefs along the way. I mean, she was just fighting for And the then mayor of Bogota, who's now the president of Colombia, Gustavo Petro, he honored that ruling and set up a public authority to allow the waste pickers to bid. And WIEGO helped them, and others helped them with their technical bid, and they secured it. And there are now more than 25 cities in Colombia that are paying the waste pickers for their services, because there was then a national ruling based on the Bogota model. Yeah, so things can happen through organization, voice, demanding rights, and it's not an easy struggle, but it's successful.
For our listeners, the Bhadra Chowk is home to a thriving daily street market that dates back at least a century. It serves to connect New Ahmedabad to the old walled city and the railway station. Every day, an estimated 50,000 people pass through the area. Over the last century, the right of street vendors to sell in the Bhadra Chowk has been contested at different points of time. Since 2001, The municipality has tried to control street vending in the area, and more recently, since the Ahmedabad Municipal Corporation, the AMC, and the Archaeological Survey of India began restoring the Bhadra Fort in 2012 and the Bhadra Maidan in 2014. The conservationists have tried to convert this area into a heritage plaza. India celebrates 75 years of independence, and I want to talk to you a little bit about your time in India, Martiben. You said you were about 17 or 18 months when you first came to India. Around independence and during the partition, you were perhaps 3.5 years old. What do you remember from that time and soon after?
Well, I do remember, even though I was 3.5, I was well, first of all, my grandparents had come to India in 1916, my paternal grandparents, as Presbyterian missionaries, but they worked in what became Pakistan. And my father and his brothers were raised in India. And my father and his younger brother came back to India with their brides and were missionaries. So we were in India, and we were in the Mussoorie Hill Station. And my mother and my grandparents and then my father came up. And so when partition happened, I remember standing with my grandparents. We were staying the top of the ridge in a part in Landau, or cantonment area of Mussoorie, looking across and seeing the smoke from the mosque burning in Mussoorie. I remembered that. I was holding my grandparents' hand. And I remember there was just sort of something in the air. There was tension, there was excitement. I mean, it was partition and independence, so it was a mixed emotion of tension and excitement. And I know that my grandparents and parents listened to Nehru's Tryst with Destiny speech. I don't remember that, but what I imagine is this crackling BBC radio recording. And then I remember that in October that year, we drove down to Dehradun to catch a train to Allahabad, which is where we were living at. And it was an armored jeep. So I still remember it was open, but they had people with rifles or something to protect us going down to the train station. So I remember that, in the open jeep. And then the other thing I remember even more vividly, because I was another half year older, was when Gandhi's ashes were taken to the Sangam. We were living in Allahabad on the Jamna River, and my father took off that morning and went to the Sangam and hired a little boat. And one of Gandhi's biographers, they sort of met there. They didn't know each other. And he rowed with my father out in this dinghy to watch the immersion. And my father brought that biographer back to the house. So I can remember the dining table dinner because it was just such another charged moment, right? So, but I knew that partition was not good at some basic level because my grandparents ended up on one side. We didn't suffer at all, but it was this strangeness that suddenly there's this artificial divide, right? And then in 1949, we drove to Rawalpindi, where my grandparents were. And I remember the border crossing in Rwanda. It was just some little barracks at the time, but just this strangeness of having to go through that, because my father and his brothers used to bicycle on the Grand Trunk Road from Pakistan, what was India then, up to Mussoorie. It was just, and all of a sudden there's this artificial divide between people who, in the north, you speak roughly the same language. And so those are my memories, that it was a mix. It was independence, but it was sadness. Yeah.
You've seen the journey of India from then to now. What is your sense?
Well, I think India's such a rich and historic, and it has such deep civilization and so many people. And, there wasn't a middle class to speak of. There were elites, and there were, when I grew up, it was, so this huge middle class that's come in is important, right? Shouldn't just be sort of elites and then a servant class, if you will. But I think for me, two sort of things have been lost because Nehru and Gandhi were so deeply committed to secularism, right? And I also know that when I was growing up in the 40s and 50s, there was sort of an innocence, And I would travel on my own when I was 13, 14. I'd go visit my friends during winter break in Punjab. I'd travel in the Zenana compartment of the train. But there wasn't eve teasing. There wasn't any of that, It was quite and so we have lost certain innocence, if you will. But I think the greatest loss is the secularism. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Marty Ben, for this lovely conversation. I'm so delighted that I got to have this conversation with you. It's really our honor to be able to have this conversation.
Well, you made it very easy. Thank you so much.
If you enjoyed listening to this conversation, do share it with your friends and family. If you would like to collaborate or partner with us or get in touch with our women's cooperatives, write to us at communications@sevafederation.org. That is communications@SEWAFEDERATION.org. We'll be back with another guest and another episode. Until then, stay tuned to In Solidarity.